For the Stretch and Explore on charcoal, there's going to be a tin of materials at your table. This is going to have kind of the two main charcoal types that we'll use for this project, along with a couple blending options and kneaded erasers. So there'll be the black charcoal, that'll be that rectangular piece. This is the vine charcoal. Vine is a little bit more fragile, so do be cautious as you're working with those. There'll also be a set of blending stumps and Q-tips as well too. Usually blending stumps are a better option if you're looking at larger areas, kind of smoothing things out. Q-tips are a little bit better when you're looking at those smaller zones or areas. And then there'll be a couple kneaded erasers. These are kind of meant to be stretched as needed. As the surface kind of gets coated, you can stretch it out a little bit, and then it helps erase better over time. Otherwise, for the sheet itself, most of this is going to be looking at how the different types of charcoal work together. This first section is going to be thinking of how these look both blended and when they're left unblended. So what I'd recommend doing is start kind of in the middle with your darkest pressure, your heaviest pressure, your darkest value, and then gradiate off on either side. As you gradiate off, the right side you're going to leave unblended. With this, I just want you to kind of observe, take in how that charcoal looks. Sometimes you do want to leave that unblended. And then the other side on that left, you're going to go in and you're going to blend that gradient, looking at how those two different charcoals blend, the comparison between the two, and the different appearance. You'll do the same process with the black charcoal as well. Kind of same thing, starting with your heaviest pressure and darkest value in the middle, then gradiating it out on either end. As you start to work through with black, start to kind of look at the difference between overall texture as you apply. You'll also, as you go on to blend, notice just the differences with these two. The big difference between vine charcoal and black charcoal is vine is typically just wooden dowels that have been burned into charcoal. Since they are an uncompressed form of charcoal, they're usually very soft and much more malleable, whereas with black charcoal, it's essentially the coal that is then compressed into a certain shape, and this does create a little bit of an issue where you're going to see a little bit more texturing with that mark making. Usually does not blend as well on those lighter areas because it is going to have a little bit more bite into the paper, whereas the vine doesn't have that effect. So this will move us into that value scale. This is where you're going to start to think on how you can utilize these two charcoals together. So typically your vine charcoal is going to be best suited for that mid-tone to lighter range. Since that vine charcoal is nice and soft, it's going to allow you to use less and less and to blend that down to those lighter values. Usually, since it's uncompressed as well, you're never going to be able to achieve true dark black. So this is going to be where you're going to start to switch over to your black charcoal, using that from that very dark shadowed end to your darker grays and into your mid-tone. Usually with kind of your mid-tones, you're going to start to look at combining both your vine and your black charcoal to achieve both the desired value as well as desired texture. So if you want it to be a little bit more smooth, the vine is going to help influence that blend and make it a little bit easier to avoid some of that grainy texture that comes with black charcoal. And then same approach with here, just kind of going through blending out. As you go through, it can be helpful. You might need to kind of clean off your blending stump either on the side of your paper, or you might just need to rotate it as you go. You can also go in and erase if it ends up being a little too dark as well. But you're going to go through, blend this out, and then just make any adjustments as you need to. This next section, you're going to look at essentially using your eraser to draw. So you're going to start with kind of like a general swatch with your vine charcoal and with your black charcoal. You can either leave these unblended. I would say have some areas where you are having blending as well too. You can also play around with just changing up pressure, seeing how the erase changes, but kind of just looking at filling in some of that area. And then once you have that general area kind of coated and covered, we're going to go in with the kneaded eraser and essentially mark up that area, reductively drawing and using that as a tool. This can end up being really helpful as we move into the project itself, allows you to kind of modify as needed and achieve sometimes those softer midtones that are within those darker areas, and creates a little bit less work for yourself. And then this next section, we're going to be looking at kind of that application of shading a three-dimensional form with spheres. The one thing just to remind you on spheres is, instead of thinking of that very kind of straight shading, we're going to instead thinking of that roundness of your form. So thinking of how that light hits that surface, thinking about like with a globe, how your lines kind of wrap around that globe instead of going straight across. So kind of same application as when we go in with the value scale. Start with kind of those mid-tone to light tone range with your vine. Once you have kind of those later tones put in, then you can start to go in, get those blended and softened. Once you have those blended in, then we'll start to go in with a black charcoal, emphasize those deeper values, and then again going back in, blending, and then smoothing those transitions between those different tones. And then same thing, just kind of making corrections as you need to on this one. And then as you start to finalize, you can start to look at that cast shadow, starting to look at where you're getting some of that reflective information. You can also go back with your eraser and kind of bring back some of those lighter tones if it got a little bit over blended. And then the last section is going to be just kind of taking all these skills together, looking at doing a little bit of practice. With these ones, both of the subjects can be a little intense. So depending on time that you want to invest, amount of practice you feel like you need, I would say either kind of zoom in to one of these two subjects, kind of look at a smaller piece or part. You can also do the whole thing if you'd like to, but I would say think of what's going to be manageable for you to do. I would say think of like almost like 15 minutes of practice on this last section or so. I wouldn't extend too far beyond that. And then this is really just looking at taking those skills, kind of applying that application, starting with your vine, getting in kind of those mid-tone to light tones, then going back in with your black, emphasizing those values. This time you're just going to start to look at kind of those key shapes, those key bits of information you see, observing that overall form and shape, and then thinking of how those values blend into one another. So just thinking kind of quick practice, getting a little bit more development, practice, exploration with charcoal before we start moving into the project next week. Otherwise, as you start to clean up, the charcoal, blending stumps, erasers can all just go back in those tins at the center of your table. And then as you get cleaned up, make sure that you do get your name on that sheet. And then as you start to wash your hands and get cleaned up, there is some bottles of dish soap over by the sinks. I would recommend using this versus the school soap dispensers. The school soap just doesn't really cut it when it comes to breaking through that charcoal and getting it off your skin. I would say use a little bit of that dish soap instead. Lather for a little bit and then rinse it off. It's going to take a lot more of that off initially and save you a little bit of time. If it does dry out your hands, I do have some lotion that's over by my desk, so feel free to use that if you need it, but you should be good to go. Holler if you have any questions.